Yeah.
Okay. Hi, everybody. Welcome to the webinar. We are thrilled to have Denise Young back this month. And as you all know, she's going to talk about a paper that was published last year that focused on a social network analysis of the North Carolina Science Festival. And I'm going to turn things over to her in just a minute or two. But I wanted to start by sharing the goals of the session. The first of those is to really think about these results and then a little bit about festivals overall within the context of a STEM ecosystem and the role that we all play in fostering connections in that ecosystem. And then we want to end by looking forward, looking ahead to Madison. We didn't have a ton of people tune in for the last webinar. If you were there, then a lot of this, the last few slides are going to be redundant for you. But we figured reminders are good for everybody since we only have a few months left before we will all be together in June. I did want to give a quick shout out. There was a pretty cool little write-up about a program that is tangentially related to the Arizona Science Festival that appeared in Science in January. So they have a small section called Outside the Tower. And the Chief Science Officer program that's based out of Arizona SciTech was featured. One of their students wrote the article that was sort of an inset in Science Magazine. And the cool thing about that in relation to the rest of the work that we do is that Chief Science Officers are actually students. They are, I think, all in high school, but they may reach down to middle school as well. And their goal is to sort of share their STEM passion with people, other students and adults across the state of Arizona. So the article says that they work independently and cooperatively to introduce new STEM programs at the school, community, and state levels. And so for those of you who are thinking about what your advisory board looks like, who your advisors are, this is kind of a neat idea for ways to think about the possibility of bringing youth into your advisory board or into some of how you recruit. So if you have a second, check that out. It is written by a young student whose last name I believe is Iyer, I-W-I-Y-E-R, and it was the January 19th, 2017 edition. It's called Young Science Officers Lead by Example, in case you're interested. And then I'm sure Jeremy would be more than happy to talk to anybody who wants to follow up as well. All right, moving right along to Denise. Here we go.
Great. Well, thanks. Karen, did we decide, are you going to drive? You want me to drive?
I can drive if you'd like.
Okay, that sounds great. Well, hi, everyone. I'm so happy to be back with EvalFest. I've been really looking forward to this. As many of you know, I took a position at the University of Minnesota back in the early fall, running a museum, the Bell Museum of Natural History and Planetarium, and so I had to leave my day-to-day EvalFest work behind with Todd and Jonathan and Karen and Catherine, but I've been keeping up with what's going on and look forward to seeing many of you at IPSEC. I'm thrilled to be able to join you there in just a few short months. So again, I look forward to seeing you there and introducing you to some of my new colleagues. And just a side note, the Twin Cities, when I got here, the first thing I did was look to see if there was a science festival, and there's not yet. So so we're working on that and look forward to joining this community again with a science festival here in the Twin Cities. So anyway, what we're going to do today is look at a study that the North Carolina Science Festival conducted or commissioned back in 2015. And the study is a social network analysis. So we're going to go into what a social network analysis is, what the North Carolina Science Festival was hoping to achieve through this study. We'll share a little bit about how we went about it, of course, share the key findings, and then some reflections on that and what it means for the North Carolina Science Festival and perhaps for other festivals. There's plenty of time for questions, so I know Taylor's keeping an eye out for that. But social network analysis in a nutshell is just the mapping and measuring of relationships between entities. That can be between people or organizations or groups, but just the nature of those relationships. It does involve a network, and so the North Carolina Science Festival is a large network. The network is in effect the boundary that we're looking at through this kind of study. And what a social network analysis measures is connections between entities. In the case of the North Carolina Science Festival, that's our event hosts and our partners. It looks at the size and span of the network along with the strength of the network. And by strength of the network, what we mean is the strength of the connection between the partners. So Karen, I think we can move it on. Great. So a little bit about why the North Carolina Science Festival was interested in conducting a social network analysis. The Science Festival in 2015 had been around for 5 years and had seen tremendous growth in that period of time. We had had communication with hundreds of partners over that 5-year period, but we also knew that several of our event hosts were also reaching out in their local communities for additional partnerships to conduct the events that they were conducting on behalf of the festival. And we didn't really have a way to capture that piece of the North Carolina Science Festival, and we weren't quite sure what was happening there, what those relationships were, why they were happening. So we really couldn't capture the full extent of what the North Carolina Science Festival was about. And then we were also curious to see if the North Carolina Science Festival might be having a larger impact kind of beyond the period of the festival, or in the way it was conducting its work, or just the Science Festival itself as a platform for STEM education, STEM learning in the state. And we thought a social network analysis might help us dig a little deeper towards that understanding. All right, Karen, we can move on. So this is just a little bit of a reminder about the North Carolina Science Festival. This is a map of the 2015 festival. The North Carolina Science Festival is a statewide festival. It started again in 2009. It is a 2-week celebration, so it takes place over 17 days, 2 weeks, 3 weekends. The hub of the activity is UNC Chapel Hill Moorhead Planetarium and Science Center. That is the entity that hosts the festival. But the way the North Carolina Science Festival had developed is that it is dependent on many statewide partners, and each one of these dots represents an event that took place during the 2015 festival. This is a large state. We actually call the festival a 400-mile wide state, science celebration where everyone's invited. And so we, to be able to pull off a statewide festival, needed a network of partners. And that means we have a really distributed organization. So we, as a festival team at Moorhead Planetarium and Science Center, only produce a handful of events on our own. Most of the events are led by event hosts who submit proposals for the events each year and are responsible for developing and implementing and even locally advertising their events with some larger statewide marketing support from the central festival team. The event hosts are the people and organizations that we are in regular communication and interaction with. So again, kind of whoever the lead is for each one of these dots, for each of these events, those are what we would call our event hosts. The North Carolina Science Festival does not require collaboration as part of the application process for events, but we encourage it and we support it whenever we can. And just some of the stats on the 2015 North Carolina Science Festival. It engaged approximately 380,000 people in close to 1,000 events. That includes both public and school-based events that took place in almost every county in the state. What we did for the social network analysis was strip out the events that take place at schools. Those are events that are largely prescribed by the North Carolina Science Festival in terms of what they are and how they work. So instead what we did was focus on the public events, the ones where there's an application process by an event host to pitch an idea for the festival. And that there were about 450 public events on the 2015 calendar for the North Carolina Science Festival. All right, Karen, we can move on. So as we were approaching the social network analysis, we wanted to have a mental model going into it, and it wasn't Bambi, but it was an ecosystem, the STEM ecosystem thinking. And this is a, STEM ecosystem is something we hear in the literature more and more. And one definition of a STEM ecosystem is that it's a collection of individual actors that are interconnected in symbiotic relationships that evolve over time. So as we were researching a little more about the STEM ecosystem, which we thought might make sense as a model for us as we're thinking to kind of ground our social network analysis, we identified several roles that relate to the concept of STEM ecosystem. And just very briefly, a few of those that I think become important for our later discussion is the idea of an ecosystem driver. A driver is an entity or entities that organize the ecosystem. They serve as the anchors for it. They create capacity and facilitate collaboration. So that's an important concept of an ecosystem driver. Then there are ecosystem brokers. And those are entities that perform acts of helping move, in our case, people or organizations from one setting to another that might kind of just generally be inaccessible to them. So an example of that would be if the Science Festival could get a business involved, a local business involved in a STEM education or STEM activity, that otherwise they wouldn't be involved in. And then, of course, the backbone of science festivals are partnerships. So we bring individuals and organizations interested in STEM and STEM learning together, around this common purpose or interest. So that's important part of thinking about a STEM ecosystem model. And then, our thinking about using STEM ecosystem as a model to ground our social network analysis was that festivals have these wide range of actors, drivers and brokers, and of course lots of partners. And this ecosystem model is an opportunity for us to see what might be what, and then to help us answer some questions about the festival, like is the festival serving as a driver or a broker in the North Carolina STEM ecosystem, and where exactly does a festival fit into the larger STEM ecosystem of our state? Karen, I think we're ready. Great. So just a little bit about how you implement a social network analysis. And the first thing I'm going to say is it's not for the faint of heart. It is lengthy and exacting process. And I will say that I certainly did not have the expertise to go this alone. And, of course, Karen is the evaluator of the North Carolina Science Festival, and she did not feel like she was capable of leading this effort either. We talked with Robert Ty about it at one point, and he said, "You're hiring an expert to help you do that, right?" So that's the kicker here is you really need an expert in doing this kind of work. And we hired Christine Bevick. She's one of the authors on the paper that we published about it. Christine was a researcher at UNC at the time. She's since moved on, but she worked in the School of Public Health and had a background in doing this sort of study. So we brought her in to help us. And then as she was leading us through the process, some of the key steps were that we determined the boundaries of our network. And for us in North Carolina, that was the event hosts, so the ones who apply to host an event in their local community. Again, we focused on those public events, and also their partners. That became part of our network boundary. We then developed surveys, and for social network analysis, there's a pre and a post survey. I will say these surveys can vary in length. Ours was pretty comprehensive. We collected information about the event hosts themselves. We identified all their had them identify all their partners and potential partners. And then we also asked them questions about those partnerships, like what kind of assistance are the partners providing? Are they providing help with planning the event or implementing it, or providing financial or in-kind support, exchanging ideas, promoting the event? So we asked a lot of questions, and we did this before the festival, before the event took place, with who we thought who they thought would be their partners and how they would participate. And then we did a post survey as well. And then we matched those up. We had an 87% completion rate between pre and post, which is very high, but we worked very hard to get to that point. I think one of the reasons we were successful is we had very strong relationships with our event hosts. So they were willing to go the extra mile for us, in addition to all the work they do just to host their events. And then as we got that data back, we analyzed it and constructed our network to be able to analyze it. I will say we also, in the case of the North Carolina Science Festival, this is not necessarily something you would have to do with a social network analysis, but we wanted to round out the numbers with some case studies. So Karen conducted 3 case studies that came out of our data, one with an informal learning organization, one with a university, and one with a middle school, just to provide a deeper sense of what our network was all about and what was happening as a result of these partnerships. So next slide. All right, so this is the output of our social network analysis in terms of the network. One of the first things we learned is that of all of the public events offered during the North Carolina Science Festival, 23% of those events had one or more partners. So just to interpret this a little bit, the orange dots represent our event hosts. Those are the ones, again, that the North Carolina Science Festival knows about by nature of them applying to host an event during the festival. The orange dots that are just sort of hanging out by themselves are the ones where they did not have one or more partners. The blue dots are the partners. So if an event host activated others in their community to host, to help with hosting an event, the blue dot represents that, and the lines, those gray lines, explain that relationship. You will see some interesting things, like an event host who's kind of leading the charge in one event might be a partner to one or more other events. We might see where there are relationships across multiple events. So this is the kind of pictorial or graphical representation of the public event network of the North Carolina Science Festival in 2015. We had close to 200 host organizations, so event hosts, and close to 300 partners. Now, the partners were the key source of kind of the big surprise here for us. We did not have a way to capture those partners before doing the social network analysis, and we find it fascinating still to this day that there are close to 300 organizations involved in the North Carolina Science Festival that we really had no idea were involved. And so that helps us see that there really is more impact in terms of bringing organizations together around this science celebration than we could have imagined or realized. We found that we had close to about 450 unique organizations then involved in producing these events. There are three concepts that are part of social network analysis. They're called density, connectedness, and centralization. And I'll just say a brief statement about those, and there's more detail in the paper about it. But density looks at the potential partnerships versus demonstrated partnerships. And what we found with the North Carolina Science Festival is that there was a low density, low network density. So there's a lot of room for growth in terms of partnership possibilities and capabilities here. Second, connectedness, which is an organization's potential to connect to one or more organizations in the network. According to social network analysis, we had a modest overall connectedness of the North Carolina Science Festival network. About 1 in 3 organizations had potential to connect to other organizations, to one or more organizations. And then degree of centralization is the third concept within social network analysis. And what that is how distributed the network is, or how close, how tight the network is woven around a central force. We in North Carolina have a very low degree of centralization, which is exactly what we expected because we have this distributed network model for being able to pull off the festival every year, where we're not in the kind of home office prescribing every event and what's happening across the state. So just a few other things we learned from this part of the analysis is that the average number of partner organizations for those organizations that partnered was 2. There was a high of 25 partner organizations in this network, and about 26% of the partner organizations worked with multiple event hosts. So a little bit of data there. And Karen, I think we can move on to the next slide. The next thing we looked at with our analysis, with our social network analysis, was who the event hosts and partner organizations were. And this was, again, another piece of data that we had ever taken the time or effort to try to figure out. We knew that we had a diverse array of event hosts, but had never sort of captured that in any certain terms. Again, the event hosts are the orange, are represented by orange. And what we found is that colleges and universities and informal learning institutions were the most common type of event host. Then nonprofits, government organizations, and K-12 schools. Smaller numbers, but still represented, were public and private green spaces, parks and such, libraries, private businesses, and news and media outlets. So again, a diverse array of event hosts, but we had never taken the opportunity or the time to sit down and look at that. We were also able to do the same sort of analysis with our partner organizations, nonprofit organizations, private business, government organizations. Those were the most common partners that our hosts reached out to, and then K-12 schools, colleges and universities, and informal learning institutions, with several others also represented. So, all right, Karen. Now, the next thing we asked our event hosts as part of the survey, the analysis, was what kind of assistance was being provided between event hosts and the partner organizations. And so so what we were trying to get at was how were they working together? The most common type of assistance from partners was to coordinate or lead event activities. And that was 64% of relationships functioned in that capacity. Then they also exchanged, next was exchanging ideas or information. That was the next most popular form of collaboration. Then offering in-kind resources. Smaller numbers of collaborations were reported to have attended planning meetings or assisting by co-hosting events. And then finally, still 12%, but a smaller number where there was direct financial support provided as part of the partnership. When we queried event hosts about the types of assistance, typically there were two types of assistance provided by the partners to the event host, but there's, of course, a range from one to all six of the types of assistance provided. All right. Then we delved into the history and the nature of the partnerships. This is pretty interesting. So, so if we think about building that network, the North Carolina Science Festival network from the bottom up, we begin with the festival itself, which is sort of the nexus, the reason that this network exists at all. And then we, in 2015, the North Carolina Science Festival partnered with about 149 host organizations to create festival programs. And then those hosts reached out to 368 partners to help produce festival programming. They invited an additional 573 organizations to attend their events. So in total, that sums up to, Karen, 1,090 connections, including 952 connections that are unique. Great, thanks. And then another way to look at this is through the partnerships. So this also helps us look at impact. Of the 368 partnerships that were created for the 2015 festival, 283 of those were existing partnerships between our hosts and other organizations. 85 were partnerships created through a prior festival and then sustained into 2015. And for 46 of those partnerships, they only occurred during the festival itself. So the festival itself was their reason for getting together in support of STEM or STEM education. We also collected some data that that showed that 83% of the event hosts and partners, while they worked together during the festival, of course, they extended their relationship beyond the festival to other STEM learning activities of some sort at some other time during the year. So the festival was breeding a relationship or partnership during the festival, but in most cases, those relationships extended beyond the 17 days of the North Carolina Science Festival. So that's also another way to look at impact. So, so just a little summary here. In thinking about Bambi meets Flower, new friends and new contexts. The network So some of the surprises to us, of course, were that the network size exceeded our expectations, that there were hundreds of unknown partners that came to light, that the diversity of those event hosts and those partners became known. The types of partnership activities also became known. You know, we learned that the North Carolina Science Festival is supportive of a STEM learning ecosystem, in that diverse partnerships were involved in a wide range of activities, going back to that definition of what a STEM learning ecosystem is. These collaborations increased over time, including repeat collaborations, and we were able to capture data that showed that a relationship that might have started during the 2009, the first Science Festival, in many cases continued and grew through successive festivals. So there was a repeated collaboration there over time, and that the collaborations extended beyond the festival, as I mentioned earlier. That also, we think, supports North Carolina's STEM learning ecosystem. So if we, really go back to the STEM ecosystem thinking here and the idea of brokers and drivers, I'll say that we couldn't really get at additional reflection or ideas around brokers and drivers without those case studies. So if social network analysis is something that you might be interested in doing, I would encourage you to think about doing some case studies to flesh out the network. But through the case studies that Karen conducted, we were able to kind of situate what entities were brokers and what might be drivers, at least in our context, and kind of posit what that might mean for other festivals. So event hosts, and again, brokers, the intentional act of connecting entities. We thought that the North Carolina Science Festival was a catalyst for brokering, but not itself the broker. We think that, very clearly the North Carolina Science Festival model, that distributed model, does not allow us to get enmeshed in creating the relationships. That's what the event hosts across the state were doing. So we thought they became the brokers and were doing a lot of the connecting. Informally, when we could, North Carolina Science Festival staff were doing that, but it really was the event hosts who we saw as the brokers in our festival. And then there's this issue of drivers. Who is creating the platform for collaboration? Who is helping to build capacity? And there's a case to be made for the North Carolina Science Festival being a driver, because we are providing that platform for all of these organizations to get together around a common topic. But we've kind of started to question whether a festival could really be a driver due to the short duration of festival events themselves, just the nature of science festivals. They are regular, but they're short in duration. There's a lot more thinking that can be done around this, and I think we'd be thrilled to hear your thoughts on this. But our case study suggested the possibility for event hosts to organize the partners and extend the activity beyond the festival period, which is also driving behavior. Again, the Science Festival wasn't designed to be a driver necessarily, but we could see in other festival situations or configurations, the way other festivals are organized, that perhaps some festivals could be drivers of STEM ecosystems in their communities. So kind of finally, in sort of our final reflection back specifically to the North Carolina Science Festival, we realized that we had only really scratched the surface in what we knew about the North Carolina Science Festival prior to doing a social network analysis, and really only scratched the surface in thinking about how the North Carolina Science Festival could play a deeper and supporting role in North Carolina's STEM ecosystem. We think there are a lot of potentials there that just had not been pursued, and this analysis really helped us to see those potentials. We identified a couple of next steps for the North Carolina Science Festival as a result of this analysis. One was to be more deliberate in encouraging partnerships and supporting event hosts that wanted to do collaborative activities. So we used that information to refine. We have a process by which event hosts can apply for funding for events they would like to do or bring to their local communities. And to encourage collaboration and partnering, we actually made that one of the criteria for selection of those funds. So we did try to use these data to encourage more partnering. We see the value and benefit in that. But we also looked at gaps in the connectivity that existed in our network. At the time I had to leave North Carolina, we were thinking about activities we could engage in to help close those gaps in terms of sharing best practices, for instance, across the partners in the network. Could we get the partners communicating directly with each other, the partners and the event hosts, to share information, to learn from each other? So those were a few key pieces of learning where we tried to implement actions back to the festival to improve it. At this point, I think we'll take questions.
And you guys have a couple of options. We're going to use the same system that we have for the last few webinars, so you can feel free to raise your hand if you'd like, or type a question into the chat, and Taylor will read that out to the group if you want to handle it that way. I will go ahead and respond to a question that Nadia posed earlier. Nadia requested that we share some of the literature on STEM ecosystems, and there were a couple of different reports. One a report on STEM learning ecosystems from the National Research Council that was published, I don't remember if it was 2015 or 2016, but we can certainly send you that. And then there's another report that was funded by a private foundation that was really helpful as we were thinking about how to characterize who we were as a festival in relation to this literature. And so we can send both of those after the call today so that everybody has access to those. All right, Nadia, I see that your hand was up. Did you have another question? Oh, hang on. Let me unmute you. Sorry. Now I've unmuted you.
Okay. When you were discussing the ecosystem, it sounded like you had a map, you might say, with points that one would say define an what that means, a STEM ecosystem.
Mm-hmm.
Is there that one part there that could be also sent with the other data that the research that you're sending?
Yeah, basically exactly what Denise was saying. Her words. Can we just have a cut and paste of what she said, because it was so great. This is Tia. Sorry.
Hi, Tia. So you want Denise's script?
Just for that section. Yeah, it was so great. It hit home with us, so we'd just like to read it again.
Karen, you have access to that, so if you want to pull that piece out,
okay.
Feel free to send that. It's also stripped directly from the paper that we published, so it's all right in there. But good, yes, it's perfectly fine to send that piece along.
Thank you.
Sure thing.
Sure.
Anybody else with a question or a comment? And maybe if people are taking a second to decide or to type a question if you're choosing to go that route. a couple of things related to the work that Denise presented today, but then also the direction that I think we're headed with some of the mini grants. One of the things that we didn't necessarily intend to do when we wrote the EvalFest grant, but that has become an opportunity that I think a lot of us are keenly aware of now, is that this project really has the potential to build a literature around festivals and the impact of festivals and why they're important. And so one of the nice things about a study like the one Denise presented today is that it may be the case that doing a social network analysis is really not anything that you're ever going to do. It just doesn't make sense for your festival in one way or another. But it could also be the case that the findings from this study have great implications for how you think about talking about the potential of your festival. So if your festival, has the potential to serve as a driver or a broker, and there's this piece in the literature that already says that there's some preliminary evidence of other festivals being able to do that and serve those functions, there's no reason to not pick that up and run with it if you think that that's going to be a compelling story for potential new sponsors or partners for your festival, even though you haven't done the data collection yourself. And so I like the idea of this work and then some of the mini grant work that's going to happen over the next couple of years, providing that extra ammunition for all of us as we think about how to characterize and tell the story about festivals and what festivals can achieve. The other thing is that, some of you might be sitting there listening to this and thinking that this sounds awesome and you want to do it yourself. And one of the recommendations or concluding statements in the paper is that, this is really only one look at a very distributed festival, and there are lots of different organizational models in the community for how festivals are implemented. And so there is the potential to put forward a mini grant that brings together different kinds of festivals to explore some of the next steps that are at the end of that paper, or other ideas that came to you during this particular webinar. And so as we move toward the May Shark Tank session that you're going to hear a little bit more about in a couple of minutes, and as we move toward June and thinking about what mini grants will happen over the next 2 years, think about this or think about other ideas that you may not want to tackle all on your own, but that you could maybe think about doing through a collaborative effort and through EvalFest. So I'm going to scroll up and down through the list one more time and just see if anybody has their hand up. Taylor, do we have any questions that have come through on your end?
Yeah, we've got from Larry. He said, in Indiana, we have been talking to other STEM festivals throughout the year involved in EvalFest. There is definite interest. I imagine a year-round network could also be analyzed as a STEM ecosystem, correct?
Absolutely. Yeah, that'd be yes. So that'd be a really interesting approach to study. So a year-round in multiple festivals, that'd be fantastic.
He also said collaborative effort would be great.
Hello, Ivy.
I'm so sorry.
That's okay. If it wasn't your dog, it was going to be mine. So
Okay.
we can check that box off for today's webinar. We have heard from one of our canine friends.
Yes.
Okay.
Well, I look forward to seeing everyone that's going to be at IPSEC in just a few short months.
All right. So let's talk a little bit about getting from here to there. If you aren't already aware of it, our webinar next month is going to be hosted by Robert Ty, and he's going to help us think about festival impacts and what are reasonable impacts to expect on your audience from an event that is short in duration, like many of our festivals are. What are reasonable impacts and what are sort of unreasonable impacts to expect from a festival in regard to your attendees. And so we're thrilled to have him come and present. He's one of our advisors and has had the chance to tune in to one or maybe two of these webinars in the past. And so we're thrilled to have him back and hosting next month. Then in May, we're going to do this Shark Tank session that we hope will be much friendlier than what the show tends to be for those of you who watch it. But the idea here is that we really want to go into our EvalFest meeting in June with a head of steam behind a few ideas that have great potential as mini grants for the next year. And so we want to use this Shark Tank idea to have different groups pitch ideas for the June session. And the idea, we have 3 that we know are going to get pitched already. We are opening this up to everybody else. So if you want to pitch an idea for a social network analysis study, if you want to pitch an idea for anything else that you'd like to invite collaboration around, the May 4th webinar is your chance. Now, I should note May 4th is earlier than when we would normally be expecting to meet. And so please make sure you can put this in your calendar. We wanted to make sure that we had a few weeks between the Shark Tank session and when we were all together in person so that we could do any background research, that we were able to gather any new information, think together as a group so that we can make the most of our time in person in June. So each of the different mini grants from this year, the motivation study that's been happening in Arizona that looks at the motivations of partners and attendees, and the timing and tracking observations that have happened in St. Pete and Jacksonville already and that will happen in Philly this spring, are going to pitch ideas for how to continue that work. So you will get a brief glimpse at what's been going on with those mini grants this year in the May session, and then there will be a pitch for how to take that work a step further and invite people to help think about those ideas, and if that's something we as either a large community or a small group would want to continue to pursue. We are also going to collect data using a truth booth kind of a mechanism in North Carolina this year. That is an idea that sort of gained a little bit of momentum when we were together last June. And so we've decided to take some of our EvalFest budget and do some pilot testing on that here this spring. And we'll share, how that went and whether we think there's potential there for a mini grant or a group of people to pursue that methodology or not. And then we welcome you to submit your own ideas. So if you think you have an idea for a mini grant and you would be interested in taking the lead with something like that, please send an email to Taylor and let her know what you're thinking about. And we will make sure we reserve some time for you in the March 4th session, or that we hook you up with other people who might be thinking along the same path. Then we will be together at IPSEC, June 5th and 6th. I think I have screwed the dates up on this a little bit. So these are the correct ones. June 5th and June 6th is IPSEC. The afternoon session of IPSEC is something that we are going to ask everyone to be in town for. And so you'll see some notes coming out about that soon with regard to when you make your travel arrangements and when you can get to Madison. We are going to have a longer presentation, we hope and think, from each of the mini grants from this year in the afternoon, and that will really be some of the new and background information that we take into an evening session on the 6th, and then it'll feed into how we spend our time together on the 7th. And that is pretty much all we have for today. Does anybody have logistical questions that they want to ask about what's going to happen EvalFest-wise between now and when we're together in June? And again, you can raise your hand if you have those, or you can type them into the chat. Okay, I'm not seeing anything come through. Taylor, do you have anything on your end?
Nope, nothing on my end.
Okay. All right, everybody. I want to say thank you again. Oh, wait, Suzanne has a question maybe. Let's see.
It was just thank you.
Thank you. All right. Also, Howard will be there with bells on, just so everybody knows. It says so in the chat. So, Howard, we will expect to see that in June. Thanks to everybody for tuning in today. Thank you to Denise for walking us through the results of this article and helping to start thinking about STEM learning ecosystems and how festivals play a role in that. we hope that you guys have been interested in that framing and will continue to think about how it could inform the work that you do with your festival or even how you choose to evaluate it. If you have questions, if you have Shark Tank ideas, please send those along. And otherwise, we will see you next month when we have Robert Tye presenting. Thanks, everybody.